Have you ever met someone who was truly a good listener? What made them stand out? Did they make you feel seen, heard, and understood? How did you know they were really listening? Welcome to the Cycle of Care podcast. I'm your host, Mona Zignego. As always, this podcast will have 3 parts. The first part of today's podcast will dive into the powerful connection between listening and care. How deep, intentional listening can provide us with information that can help us understand ourselves, others, and the world around us better. Then, I will share a simple and meaningful activity to help us all strengthen our listening skills. And finally, we'll spotlight our Cycle of Care superhero, someone who embodies the art of listening in action. The Cycle of Care is the giving and receiving of energy that happens between 2 people. When care is facilitated, energy moves smoothly back and forth between the 2 people, while one person provides care and the other person receives it. Like when a parent cares for a child, a nurse cares for a patient, or a teacher teaches students. Care is facilitated when we do this work, even when it is hard, such as when a patient is being difficult, a coworker is triggering negative emotions for us, or a student is sleeping in class while we are trying to teach. When we care for others, we are as fully attentive to the needs, concerns, and experiences of others as we can be in that moment. At times, we put aside our own interests, at least temporarily, in order to respond to the needs of those we are caring for. Through this process, we act in a way that is beneficial for those we are caring for, not out of obligation or duty, but out of deep relational commitment. Sometimes, the cycle of care we give to others is natural, like when a parent cares for a child. Ethical care, on the other hand, requires deliberate commitment. It occurs when we choose to care, even in the absence of natural feelings, because we value caring as a moral ideal. This becomes especially important in both personal and professional settings, like at work, where we may not always feel an emotional connection to everyone we work with, but must still act with care and treat others with compassion, or at a family Thanksgiving dinner when politics come up. Whatever that may look like in individual circumstances, we prioritize relationships and human beings and the commitments we have made to them. And we do our best to be caring, empathetic individuals while having boundaries on our time, energy, and resources, of course, so that we also care for ourselves in the process. When I think about how care operates in my work, education is the field I have the most experience in. So to me, the goal of teaching is not just knowledge acquisition for students, although that is extremely important, but I also believe that the goal of education is to create caring individuals. Transferring that to our world outside the walls of the classroom, my hope is that homes, workplaces, churches, boardrooms, offices, grocery stores, courtrooms, you name it, every part of our world can function as communities of care where care for others is central and prioritized. I believe that our world needs more care. As I speak these words, I know this work begins with each one of us, and I know I am a work in progress, and I am striving every day to become a better person and make the world a better place. I fall down a lot, but I am trying. As always, I invite you to join me on this journey. I also want to mention again that boundaries are an important part of this work as well. Caring for others does not mean neglecting yourself. In no way am I suggesting that we should ever tolerate being treated poorly or accept harmful behavior in the name of care. True care includes setting boundaries and honoring your own well-being while showing compassion for others. It's not about sacrificing yourself. It's about creating space for mutual respect, dignity, and honoring commitments and responsibilities in every interaction, including those we have made to ourselves. So, this podcast focuses on how we can implement caring practices into our lives every day as often as possible, and how we can become more aware of care and where the cycle of care is being facilitated in our lives and where it is not. One thing we can do to facilitate care is by listening. When I talk about listening, it might mean something different than what most people would think. Listening in the cycle of care means that we are also using other elements besides just our ears. We are using every available resource at our disposal to gather every bit of information we can. The goal of listening is to leave no stone unturned in our effort to have the fullest picture possible of the person or situation before us so that we can respond with care. Listening means stepping outside of ourselves, setting aside our own thoughts and distractions so we can fully focus on the other person, group, or situation. It's about being present and attentive, allowing us to offer care through listening in the most thoughtful and appropriate way possible for whatever situation we find ourselves in. In my book, Transforming Teaching Through the Cycle of Care, Chapter 4 digs into intentional listening, and I discuss something called data distress. Data distress happens when we draw from a very narrow set of data or information that does not give us a full picture of what is happening. Data distress leads to situations that can be harmful and hurtful to others through making assumptions, bias, and stereotypes. The information we collect or listen for will optimally provide us with a holistic or full picture of what or who we are dealing with and the human behind the numbers. Listening in the cycle of care is a comprehensive process that looks at what our knowledge level is, what our biases may be in the situation, and how we can embrace objectivity when collecting or listening for information as much as possible to create a true picture of what is happening so that we can move forward productively and compassionately. There's a show on Netflix right now called The Residence that I am really into. It's a mystery set in the White House where a detective named Cordelia Cupp is trying to solve a complex case. As this detective asks questions, she practices the most deep listening I think I have ever seen. She listens with every fiber of her being. Every sense she has is activated and listening, seeking information. There are times that she doesn't even ask a question to those she is interviewing. She just sits and waits until eventually the person begins to speak. Then, as the person begins to talk, Detective Cupp listens. She listens intently, as though there is nothing else in the world more important than that conversation. Every sense she has is focused on the person speaking as she listens for clues. This is really relevant to our discussion because listening is facilitated when we collect data or seek information using all our senses and by pausing, not always talking, and just listening. Listening is also facilitated when we draw from as many sources as possible, we refrain from judgment by considering alternate perspectives or theories, and we remain open to learning more about ourselves and how we impact outcomes around us. This is how we avoid data distress. There are elements that disrupt listening for data and information. Listening is disrupted when we limit ourselves to a narrow, rigid perspective or gather information from only one source. Listening is also disrupted when we stop paying attention, tune out, or go through the motions without true engagement. This causes a cycle of care to break down. Listening is also disrupted when we close ourselves off to the kind of self-awareness that leads to growth, when we avoid gathering information about how we're showing up in relationships or various situations in our life and reflect on the impact we're having. True listening requires us to stay curious and use every resource available to us, including all the senses we have available to us, such as sight, smell, touch, taste. It means looking deeply into things and at things, asking more questions, drawing data and information from as many sources as possible, and staying open to what we might discover, not just about others, but also about ourselves. When we commit to that kind of listening, we can understand more about our world and ourselves, and we can bring more compassion, empathy, and even boundaries into our world. When we don't, care is disrupted and not as present or as powerful as it could be. The true purpose of listening is not just to hear words, but to deepen our understanding of ourselves, of others, and of the world around us. When we listen with intention and care, we create space for connection, empathy, insight, and solution-oriented thinking. Let's go a little deeper into this idea of listening as a tool for care. Listening in the cycle of care asks us to be active in this process. It is a highly intentional, active practice of gathering information that calls us to engage every resource available to us. We often think of listening as just using our ears, but it's so much more than that. It's about using all our senses, what we see, notice, feel, even smell or taste, or infer, to form a fuller picture of what's happening around us and within us. Listening is about paying attention to tone, body language, silence, inconsistencies, and emotions. It means asking thoughtful questions, looking for patterns, staying curious, and sometimes reading between the lines. When we listen like this, we aren't just collecting surface-level information. We're positioning ourselves to respond in the best way we can for the time we are in and the resources we have available to us. This kind of listening enables solution-oriented movement forward. It helps us see where we are, who we are, how we respond to different situations, what might be needed next, what barriers are in the way of our progress, and sometimes will help us listen to ourselves and our needs to understand what boundaries we need to have in order to care for ourselves. Yes, listening is a fuel for personal growth for each one of us, if we take the opportunity to make it so. Through this intentional caring, multifaceted listening, we are able to become more aware of the truth of what is happening around us and inside of us. We are able to gain insight on how we're showing up, what we're learning, and where we might need to shift. For example, if a student is sleeping in class, instead of immediately correcting or reprimanding, a teacher practicing deep listening might first wonder why and gently explore underlying reasons. Is the student getting enough sleep at home? Are they struggling emotionally, physically, or academically? Another example, if a patient is cranky or unkind to a nurse, the nurse who listens deeply will continue providing care, recognizing the crankiness might come from pain, frustration, or even fear, not a personal issue. When a friend becomes withdrawn or distant, intentional listening means gently checking in, observing cues, and asking questions that show care, compassion, and a willingness to truly understand what they're experiencing. If a colleague consistently misses deadlines, instead of assuming negligence, a good listener asks curious, supportive questions to discover what barriers or challenges might be getting in their way. In each of these situations, listening deeply allows us to respond with genuine care, clarity, and compassion, enabling not just immediate solutions, but rather long-term growth, stronger, healthier relationships, and bringing care into our world. In this way, listening is both a mirror and a bridge. A mirror that reflects back insights about ourselves, and a bridge that connects us more meaningfully to others. It's not always easy. Sometimes listening reveals hard truths. But when we stay open, listening becomes a powerful step towards healing, transformation, and care that is truly rooted in understanding. Since the last episode, I have done some hard thinking and some deep reflecting. If you haven't listened to episode 4, you will understand more about what I'm about to say if you go back and listen to that episode first. After episode 4, I thought a lot about the instrumental part of my brain and the relational aspects of my brain. I realized that I often push ahead with tasks, deadlines, to-do lists, and solutions without remembering the relationships involved in all those tasks and decisions. I reflected and recognized that I sometimes move forward too quickly without fully considering the people involved or how they might be feeling. I loved this revelation about myself, and I have been trying to be really intentional about pausing to listen to those around me and include them in decisions and solutions when appropriate. And I've just really tried to have some honest and forthright conversations about this work that I'm doing to care more deeply for others and to bring more care into the world. I also made a point to apologize to those that I inadvertently hurt or passed over in my quest to get all the things accomplished and completed. I truly believe that listening deeply helps us care for ourselves and care for others. The world needs more care. We all know that. Let's proactively do this together, one step at a time, every single day. Please join me on this journey of care. So far, I've been speaking broadly about listening as the practice of using all available resources to gather as much information as possible so we can develop a fuller, more accurate understanding of a person or situation. Let's talk about some characteristics of good listeners and start with presence. I have a friend who I would characterize as a good listener. She is 100% with me when we are talking. A good listener is all in. They're not multitasking. They're not thinking about what they'll say next. They're here. Their body language says, I'm with you, I'm listening to you, I am paying attention to you as you speak. Additionally, good listeners approach conversations with genuine curiosity. They're not focused on slinging zingers or winning an argument or proving a point. Instead, they truly want to understand. This sincere openness helps us feel safe and accepted without fear of being judged. I mentioned my friend who's a good listener a minute ago. Recently, we had a conversation where she asked me if I was doing okay, and she listened as I answered. She held space for me to have whatever feelings and emotions I needed to have, and she affirmed my right to have those feelings and emotions. Good listeners notice when someone's hurting or celebrating. Good listeners don't brush over emotions, they acknowledge them. Good listeners recognize and respect what others are feeling. We talked a lot about emotions in episode 1. I also talk a lot about emotions in chapter 1 of my book, Transforming Teaching Through the Cycle of Care. Emotions are important, and so is acknowledging them in others, as you are deeply listening without interrupting. And that's another element good listeners possess. They hold space without interrupting or offering unsolicited advice. It's about listening without trying to fix. This is hard for me. I have to tell myself to pause and listen, not respond. And then, a good listener listens for what is present beyond the words that are being spoken. Words matter, but so does what's underneath them. Tone, body language, even silence. All of that is information. Like I mentioned earlier, good listeners tune in with all their senses and use all of the resources they have available. Another way to practice being a good listener is to repeat back what you heard. A simple, what I'm hearing is, can go a long way. Reflecting back what we hear shows we're truly listening and invites a deeper connection. Good listeners also invite the speaker to continue. One sentence stem that has been particularly helpful to me is to say, tell me more, or say more about that. Finally, a good listener doesn't assume they know everything. They're willing to reflect, to check their own assumptions, and to grow through the conversation. When we work on these qualities, presence, curiosity, emotional awareness, we don't just become better listeners, we become more caring, compassionate, and connected human beings. So let's practice. Let's slow down together and build this skill of intentional listening within the cycle of care through today's activity. The activity for today is called Avoid Data Distress, Notice and Reflect. This activity is something you can do right now or come back to whenever you need to reset your focus and reconnect with intentional care. So, first we notice. We notice something about an interaction with another person. Choose a recent interaction you had with a friend, a colleague, a loved one. Take a few quiet moments to reflect on what you noticed during that interaction as you listened with all your senses and resources available to you. We first notice what is happening with the other person. Notice what the other person said and how they said it. Notice the nonverbal cues, body language, facial expression, energy, context. Notice any other resources available that could help with listening more deeply for understanding, context, and solution-oriented movement forward. Then we reflect. We reflect on our part in the interaction. Reflect on what you did as you listened. Were you truly listening? Reflect on your presence. Were you fully present as you listened? Or were you distracted? Reflect on your pause. Were you able to pause and listen? Or were you thinking about what you were going to say next? Reflect on your feelings. What feelings came up for you? Reflect on your biases. What assumptions or stories might you have been carrying and bringing into the situation? So we notice what is happening with the other person, and then we reflect on our part in the interaction. Notice what is happening with the other person. Reflect on what is happening with us. Notice what is happening with the other person. Reflect on what is happening with us. I created this simple practice, notice and reflect, to help us get our listening muscles in shape. It builds our ability to intentionally and fully engage in listening while also acknowledging our accountability in this process. Doing this consistently helps us to become more knowledgeable about ourselves and others and allows us to move forward in solution-oriented, caring ways. Now it is time for us to celebrate our cycle of care superhero, someone who lives out the kind of listening we've been talking about and reminds us what's possible when care is exemplified through listening. My cycle of care superhero for this episode is someone very dear to me named Matthew. He exemplified deep listening during a time in my life that was very difficult for me. My husband had been very sick and had received a liver transplant. The recovery from that transplant was very difficult and prolonged. But slowly but surely, as my husband began to recover, he once again became the person I used to know and tried to take up some of his old hobbies. One of his hobbies is to ride his four-wheeler. Just to make sure we all know what I'm talking about, a four-wheeler is also known as an ATV or an all-terrain vehicle. An ATV is a small motorized vehicle designed to travel over rough or uneven terrain. It typically has 4 large tires, handlebars for steering, and a seat designed to be straddled by the rider. Four-wheelers are commonly used for recreation, outdoor sports, farming, or trail riding, and it was something my husband loved to do ever since he was a child growing up on a farm. Matthew was concerned when he heard that my husband was riding his four-wheeler again so soon after receiving a liver transplant. Matthew was someone who deeply cared about others and was always listening closely, trying to gather as much information as possible so he could best support the people around him. His life experiences had given him both strength and resilience, enabling him to empathize genuinely with the struggles of others. When I shared with Matthew that my husband was recovering and had returned to his favorite activity, Matthew's forehead creased thoughtfully as he processed what I had said about my husband riding a four-wheeler. His genuine concern prompted him to ask careful, probing questions about whether this activity was safe and if my husband would truly be okay. I reassured Matthew, explaining that my husband was being careful, only riding his four-wheeler on very smooth country roads or very flat open fields. Matthew's thoughtful listening and heartfelt questions reminded me of the true essence of care. He wasn't just listening to reply, but to understand deeply and to ensure that everything was truly all right. That kind of listening is a powerful example of how care can flow effortlessly between people. It also reminds us how meaningful genuine concern and attention can be, offering comfort and strength exactly when it is most needed. So, Matthew is my cycle of care superhero for this episode. Through his deep, intentional listening, genuine empathy, and sincere concern, not just in this situation, but always, Matthew demonstrated exactly what it means to embody care in action. He showed me how powerful listening can be, not just in gathering information, but in creating meaningful connections and providing true comfort during challenging times. Matthew's example inspires me every day to listen more fully, to approach conversations with genuine curiosity, and to always show compassion toward others. For all these reasons and more, I am so honored to spotlight Matthew as my cycle of care superhero and as someone who exemplifies listening within the cycle of care. As we close today's episode, let's remember that listening helps us to avoid data distress. It's more than just hearing words. Listening is a practice of intentionally listening for information in order to avoid a narrow, untrue, unfair, inequitable picture of a person or situation. Each time we listen deeply, we take a step toward becoming more compassionate, more empathetic, and ultimately more connected humans. Like our cycle of care superhero, Matthew, we can show genuine care by being fully present, asking thoughtful questions, and holding space for those around us. I encourage you to practice our notice and reflect activity. Notice. Take time to reflect deeply on a recent interaction, paying attention with all your senses. Notice what the other person said and how they said it. What nonverbal cues did you observe? What other resources could help you gain deeper understanding and context? And reflect. Consider your own presence in that interaction. Were you fully present and focused, or were you distracted and thinking about your next response? Reflect on the feelings, assumptions, or stories you might have carried into that moment. Notice what is happening with the other person. Reflect on what is happening with us. Consistently engaging in this simple practice will strengthen your listening skills, deepen your awareness, and allow you to move forward in solution-oriented, caring ways. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs this message. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or at my website, monazignego.com. Let's keep this conversation about listening going. Notice what is happening with others. Reflect on what is happening with you. Connect with me on social media or send me a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Mona Zignego, and this is the Cycle of Care podcast. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Take care.